Hi, everybody. So in this video, we're going to talk about the differences between lipid-soluble hormones and water-soluble hormones. Now, our lipid-soluble hormones are going to be steroid-based. Okay, so they're going to include this kind of four-ring structure. Now, keep in mind that whenever you see these kinds of skeleton structures here, anywhere where you see like a point, that's a carbon, and it is also importantly a carbon with the maximum number of hydrogens attached to it. So this one right here, it's only got 2 bonds. So that means we have 2 more hydrogens right here. This one we have 1, 2, 3 bonds. So this one we only have 1. Okay, so these are hydrocarbon molecules. Now, because they are hydrocarbon molecules, with very few oxygens, with the exception of maybe on the ends, that means we are primarily nonpolar. And remember that nonpolar things interact well with nonpolar things. So steroid hormones are going to interact with other nonpolar things. Now, because they're going to be interacting with nonpolar things, that means they're going to interact really, really well with lipids. However, that also means they're not going to interact very well with blood. Because remember that we are trying to move a hormone from, say, our endocrine organ to some of our target tissues. And we do that by moving it through the blood. Well, if we're going to move something that is lipid soluble through the blood, we're probably going to need help because, well, blood is primarily water, or at least blood plasma is primarily water, which means it's going to be a lot more difficult to actually do that. So we are going to require some kind of helper proteins to help us do this. Now, good examples of lipid soluble hormones are going to be things like your sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, as well as cortisol and aldosterone. So these are the main examples of these lipid-soluble hormones and the things that we're going to have to carry to different tissues using some sort of carrier or helper molecule. However, keep in mind that the center region of your plasma membranes are composed of lipids, where we only have like those really small phosphate heads on either side, which means these lipid-soluble hormones should be able to just pass through the membrane without much help. So like I said, we need to use a carrier protein in order to get our lipid-soluble hormones from the endocrine system organ to their target cell. So to move them through the blood, they do have to be bound to a protein. Now, one of the other things that binding them to these helper proteins is going to do, though, this is also going to help them last a very long time in the blood. Okay, so if you were to, say, inject someone with additional testosterone, that extra testosterone is going to hang out in their bloodstream for a very long period of time, because something like 90% of all of these hormones that are going to be found in the blood are going to be bound to a hormone or bound to a carrier protein. Now, because they are bound to a carrier protein, that means they're not necessarily having those effects on the target cells. They have to unbind to do that. So usually they're going to be kind of staying stuck. They're going to let go for a little bit, then they'll stay stuck again. Imagine like a small toddler that wants a little bit of freedom every now and then, but for the most part, they're hanging onto their mom's legs. Okay, that's kind of what we're looking at here. They're going to be hanging on for dear life next to that bound hormone as they're moving through the blood. Just every now and then, they're just going to kind of walk away for a minute. Whenever they walk away, this is the time that they could be absorbed. What this means, though, is that they can last a very long time in the blood. Now, the more of the protein or more of the hormone that is held to those bound hormones, the longer it's going to last. Okay. Now we can also see kind of some rates of release and how often, like if you make more hormone, release more hormone in the blood, of course, it's going to raise the concentration in the blood. However, eliminating the hormones from the blood can occur in several different ways. Now, we call this rate of decline in hormone levels, or in many other things, half-lives, okay? Because we're usually going to decrease them by halves over some interval, okay? Steroid hormones, because most of these things are going to be bound to a carrier protein, they're going to be protected by that carrier protein, just like a toddler is protected by mom when they're holding on to mom's legs. The more of them that are bound, the more protected they are going to be, which means we're not going to be able to eliminate them very fast. So steroid hormones tend to have really, really long half-lives and have to have really long effects. Athletes and things like that would use testosterone injections to cheat, basically, they wouldn't need a testosterone injection every hour or even every day. A single injection could actually work for them over multiple days. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind here. Whereas something that's water soluble it's just kind of floating around in the blood plasma all on its own. Well, those are generally going to have shorter half-lives. So if we want to keep levels high, we have to continually make them at a fairly high level to make and secrete them at a fairly high level to make sure that we can keep them at their proper levels and keep those functions going. Now, as I said before, these lipid-soluble hormones are going to do a great job of being able to pass through our cell membranes. So because they are non-polar, it makes it a lot easier for them to slide through. The receptors for those lipid hormones then aren't going to be in the membrane. Instead, they're going to be found inside the cell. So if this is your cell, the receptors are going to be in here. So the hormones have to cross into the cell, pass through the membrane before they can actually get to the receptors and cause the effects. Now, usually these effects are going to mean that they're going to they pass through, so they let go. So bound hormone just passes right on by. Unbound hormone can pass through the cell membrane, find its little receptor complex, and then that receptor complex will come down here to the DNA and cause the effects to start happening. Come down here to the DNA, make a protein, or make an mRNA that becomes a protein. So that's how we can regulate these processes of protein manufacture based off of some of these lipid-soluble hormones. Water-soluble hormones, we have a different problem, okay? Water-soluble hormones move through the blood fantastically. It's really easy to just like throw them into the blood plasma and they're just going to run, okay? They just immediately get enveloped by all of the different water molecules. So they're going to pass through blood plasma really, really easily. Now, this is because we have these kinds of acidic regions, or all these polar regions found all over our amino acids, and they're going to fold themselves in such a way to take all those non-polar areas away from the water, which means it's going to make it even more easy to move through. However, proteins are big, and their proteins are even the monoamines. Their monoamines aren't that big, but the proteins are. But they are polar, which means whenever they go to try and hit that little non-polar region on the inside of our cell membranes, they're just going to get to it and then just bounce right out. They're not going to be able to pass through, which means we have to do something different, okay? Now, what we're going to have here is we're going to have what's called a signal transduction pathway, where you can think of the hormone as basically being a letter carrier going to a building. So the letter carrier takes, or I guess a messenger, brings the letter to the building, and then the bellhop says like, no, you can't really come in here. So they're going to take your package, and then they will take the package to the house that it needs to go to, okay? So the hormone is the first messenger that brings it to the building. We then have another messenger called the G protein that's going to be on the inside of the building or on the inside of the cell that will then carry that message along. And in this case, the message would be, hey, we need to take in glucose, or hey, we need to do some other thing inside the cell. Now we're going to call this process G protein activation, or a second messenger system. Okay, so here we have our water soluble hormone. It's going to hit its little receptor protein. Now bound to that receptor protein is going to be our second messenger, or our G protein. It then gets activated after the hormone binds, and it's going to shoot down the cell membrane until it finds its next site. Now, the next place it's going to go is going to be adenylate cyclase, okay? So it's going to be hormone receptor, G protein, adenylate cyclase, and then cyclic AMP, and then finally a protein kinase. So this is going to be this kind of signal transduction, or this little pathway of interactions. So that G protein runs down the way, finds our adenylate cyclase, which generates a cyclic AMP, which then activates our protein kinase. So we're going to see this little cascade of reactions where we go from hormone receptor to G protein, adenylate cyclase, cyclic AMP, and then finally our protein kinase in this particular order. Now that activated protein kinase can then move inside the cell and cause its own little cascade of reactions on the inside of the cell. Something like the uptake of insulin or uptake of sugar from cells due to insulin binding could go through as many as 18 or 19 steps before we actually get to proteins on the outside of the cell to allow the sugar to come in. But that is how our water-soluble hormones are going to act inside the cells. So remember, lipid-soluble hormones don't move through the blood very well, so we have to have carrier proteins. However, they do move through the cell membranes very well, so their receptors, so lipid-soluble hormones are going to have receptors inside the cells, and those are then going to cause the cascade of reactions to occur. Water-soluble hormones move through the blood plasma really well, but they don't move through the cell membrane very well. So we're going to have that second messenger system cascade. So they're going to bind the receptor on the surface, hit our G protein, and then hit the rest of those second messenger systems. So if we have any questions about this process, please just let me know. And I guess I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks. Bye.